Okay, a very warm welcome. It's lovely to see you. Thank you very much for joining our breakout session after lunch. We're going to be talking today about a couple of the really big issues that are happening in this space around apprenticeships and small businesses and how those can really support young people to find their feet in the labour market and develop. And there's really no bigger issue at the moment, particularly as we sit here in Manchester, the new capital of the UK, and think about one of the issues that is kind of right at the top of the political spectrum. You'll know at the moment that Alan Milburn is looking at all aspects of policy and support for young people who are not in education, employment, or training. A horrible acronym, but a useful one for us to think about that kind of particular group. We are at the moment running a campaign with Anna, who is on the panel today, Amazing Apprenticeships. On the back of our apprenticeships work campaign, we're looking at our apprenticeship summer, which is helping more SMEs to offer apprenticeships. And that's really important to us because we know that the smaller businesses, SMEs, are much more likely to employ younger apprentices and employ local. So it's all part of this kind of challenge that we've talking about that has been a rich theme through the discussions this morning of helping more young people to find their feet in the labour market. So that's what we're going to be talking about. Hopefully you're in the right place. I can't see anyone running to leave, so that's a great start. I've got four fantastic panelists with me to help discuss the kind of issues around this. So what we're going to do first is I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves and say a little bit about their work and kind of help pick up one of the kind of key themes in this space. And then we'll open it up, and I want to make it very interactive. So as soon as we've done that, we'll take a few questions and thoughts from the floor and start to build the conversation out to the kind of topics that you care about and you want to know about. So Laura, it's lovely to have you with us. Do you want to just say who you are and where you're from, and then we'll start the conversation from there?
Thanks so much, Ollie. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm Laura Hawksworth. I'm Associate Director, Policy and Impact for the Careers and Enterprise Company, which is the national body for careers education in England. Our work includes the full range of careers education, but obviously today I'll be focusing on SMEs and apprenticeships and technical education.
Brilliant. Thank you, Laura. And it's been a real transformation, hasn't it, in recent years that more young people know about apprenticeships. That's a big win. We should all be really
Exactly that.
happy about that. But I guess the question remains: do the right young people know about the right apprenticeships? Or is it kind of has that changed the nature of the program? And I know it's something that you've done a lot of work on. You care about a lot. So tell us a little bit about that.
Super. So I've got some slides, which I'm just going to quickly run through for you just to back up what I'm talking you through today. I'll perhaps start by just having a show of hands. How many of you are aware of the work of the Careers and Enterprise Company? Maybe if you just put. So it's a pretty good awareness, but not, yeah, mostly. Okay, so we're the independent national body preparing young people for their futures. We have a regional network up and down England of 44 careers hubs, and 96% of secondary schools and colleges are members of those local careers hubs, and they are coterminous with mayoral, strategic and local authorities such as Greater Manchester Combined Authority, where we are here today. And that's significant because we have that level of coverage, it gives us insight and data, and we work with thousands of employers up and down the country, including SMEs. So that's our mission, to help every young person find their best next step. Our offer is universal and it's system-based, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. As Ollie said, yes, we can see in the data more young people know about apprenticeships. If you look, for example, at DFE data, parent, pupil and learner voice shows 100% awareness. That's awareness. We look at understanding at CEC. So we have 1/3 young people, and we can see they say that their understanding doubles between years 7 and 11. So that's good. Is it good enough? Our analysis also shows that career readiness, which includes pathway understanding, improves faster where careers education is the highest quality, as measured by Gatsby benchmarks. And we know, you mentioned Alan Milburn's interim report, that disadvantage, health and place continue to shape young people's access to opportunities. And we have something called an ATE, that's Apprenticeships and Technical Education Framework, which gives us the opportunity to take a systems approach to looking at how that awareness can be translated into uptake. But as you say, are the right young people aware and understanding apprenticeships? We've got some interesting data here from our Future Skills Questionnaire, which shows that actually, if you look at FSM versus non-FSM, understanding of apprenticeship and A-levels is actually pretty high, about, getting on for 80%. And actually, for the FSM young people, it's closer around apprenticeships. So it's about a 4 percentage point difference, whereas for A levels, it's further away. So this pathway understanding is a general issue for young people from free school meal eligible backgrounds. So what are we doing about it? We have something particularly today I'd like to talk to you about called the Boosting Skills Pathways Programme, which uses our system based framework looking at all the factors that influence successful transition and employer led outreach in growth sectors to increase that awareness and uptake. That tells us repeated, meaningful encounters with employers, FE colleges, and training providers improves understanding and supports those progression decisions. So it's not just about knowing about apprenticeships. So, Careers Hub coordination is also needed at those 44 areas to firstly boost the opportunities available, increase enthusiasm for those, and improve the conversion of interest to uptake. And we also have something which is philanthropic corporate investment from the Salesforce Foundation called the Digital Futures Accelerator Funds, a horrible acronym again, DFAF, we call it. But this program is helping us apply our system thinking through the AT framework to identify and overcome barriers, particularly around digital apprenticeships in disadvantaged communities. So that's quite exciting for us. Brief case study, aware of time. Um, Rural and coastal areas are of concern. Um, Devon, Plymouth, and Torbay here through Build Torbay, which works closely with SMEs, worked with Year 10 students in alternative provision, those furthest away from the labour market, most at risk, to design and build a community cafe, helping them develop practical teamwork and communication skills and really deepen that understanding of construction careers and pathways. And so, is there more we need to do? Yes, absolutely. The Gatsby benchmarks have been strengthened in statutory guidance. This is the second year now of that updated guidance. They really talk about personalised and meaningful encounters for all young people, particularly those furthest away from the labour market. Sector approaches, particularly in areas like home building, which would enable SME engagement to have more structured pathways, not just that awareness, but that conversion, and localized approaches. So we talk very much about a place-based model. We talk about devolution, but using the evidence base that we get through a national body to make assessments through things like a system-wide approach. So that's what I'd like to say on the topic.
Thank you so much, Laura. That was really valuable. Just to pick up a couple of points that really resonated with me. One of those is something we've heard a lot about before, which is this idea of kind of starting early, really engaging. Like it's not okay to start thinking about this at 16, and the kind of the more subtle and the more often we bring this in, the better. So Gatsby benchmark 4, for those of you who haven't memorized that, that's careers in the curriculum. Hope I get my gold stuff.
Shocking.
That's so important, even from primary school, isn't it, to just kind of give that idea. And I think the other point you made, and it really came out of that graph of knowledge about even A levels, is that our system is so complex. And I think ministers of all parties have sometimes made the mistake of arriving and saying, we're going to simplify it by adding just one more thing. And it's like, that's not actually simplification. So even the most kind of gold standard route that everyone should know about, not everyone really understands. And I think that kind of complexity is something that we'll definitely come back to. Thank you, Laura. Kate, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah. So I'm Kate Carr and I'm from the Youth Futures Foundation. My colleague Sarah was on the panel before lunch, so I won't say too much about us other than just to confirm our mission is to ensure that all young people, particularly those from marginalised backgrounds, can obtain and most importantly succeed in good work. And the way that we do that is by building and sharing a really robust evidence base, looking at both what the best out there internationally are doing, but also running trials, randomized control trials with employers in the UK to really identify those very specific interventions that support those young people into work.
Brilliant, thank you. And success rates in apprenticeships have always been a challenge and something that's worrying us. I know the Sutton Trust are doing a piece of work this year, which we're really welcoming, looking at success rates more generally. But in terms of what we're talking about today, success rates are also significantly lower for young people who've got that kind of experience of being neat. So I guess from your work and from your evidence base, what are the kind of things that help those young people once they've got an apprenticeship to kind of thrive and get to the end of it?
And I'm glad you've asked.
Yeah, Laura, the
I
magic
prepared
box.
to decide. Thank you. So I can scoot through some of these. So I think it is really important to talk about what those solutions are, but I think we also need to make sure we're all on the same page when it comes to the problem that we're talking about. And I think one thing that we have heard throughout today, but is worth reiterating, is that it isn't about motivation of the young people, but it's about the system that they're having to try and navigate. So it's not just about how do we prepare young people for work, but how do we really design those systems that can support them to obtain and thrive in good work. Um, who is it that needs the support? It's really important to understand that because NEAT, and I will use that term, I know it's not loved by everyone, but we all understand what we mean by it. It's not a single entity. These are 1 million individuals, all with their own distinct backgrounds. But what's really clear, and it was touched on a little bit in the panel earlier, is there isn't one particular factor that is making it really difficult for that cohort. It's where there are overlapping disadvantages. So we know that nearly 25% of young people have 6 or more risk factors when it comes to being NEET. So it's a huge proportion of people that are really facing a lot of challenges. And for most of those, they are finding work, but a huge number of people aren't. The strongest predictors of who is likely to be NEET are those that have um, nothing above level 1 in terms of educational qualifications, special educational needs, poor mental health, limiting disabilities, and early parenthood. And then we also know that people who are from income backgrounds, care backgrounds, criminal justice experienced, and certain ethnic and sexual identity minority groups are also more likely to be at risk. So it's that combination of education, health, and socioeconomic barriers that's really driving the NEET problems. Um, so, what's getting in the way of these young people from being able to get apprenticeships? Well, our evidence shows that it really is about systemic barriers and not individual ones. So, the four kind of key pillars that I've set out on the slide, the first is around low awareness and understanding, which may contradict a little bit the CEC, but I suppose it's the understanding, and that is particularly true for some groups. So, conscious of time, but I was in Burnley in November with a group of young people from Bangladeshi and Pakistani backgrounds, and they were talking about how difficult it is to really go against family and community expectations that they will be going to university, they will do law or medicine or pharmacy or accountancy, and actually to have conversations with their families which are saying we want to take a different route is really difficult. But what also stuck in my mind is that we were with a group of employers, and their response was, "That's really terrible, and I really feel for these young people. But what can we do? We can't interfere in that family." And it was saying, "Well, you go to where the families are. You don't throw open your doors of your kind of shiny glass towers and say, 'Come and have a look.' You go to their community centres. You go to their wedding venues. You talk to them. You bring people, role models along to talk about some of the opportunities." So that awareness piece is a huge one, and one that employers absolutely do have a role in trying to combat. Financial barriers, I think we've heard about this before. Low wages can make apprenticeships unviable. We've talked about some of the issues associated with kind of benefits that reduce as a result of an apprentice coming into the family. And then we've also got those costs that are associated um, with apprenticeships. So, it's not as easy as employers raise wages. We know that's not necessarily viable. But young people will face costs like transport costs, uniform costs. They may be expected to supply their own tools. Those kinds of things can make apprenticeships out of reach for particularly those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Also, really sounds quite a simple thing, but there are discounts available to apprenticeships if you're part of certain networks. Just promoting some of those things when packaged together might just make that apprenticeship a little bit more viable. Inclusion is obviously huge. Our latest discrimination in work survey showed that 50% of young people have experienced discrimination in the workplace. Of course, that means that they're likely to, well, not likely to, but you could see why it might be difficult for those young people to stay in apprenticeship when they don't feel welcome in the organisation. And the fourth kind of really key one is geographic inequality. So opportunities really do depend on where you live. Our data shows that there's a 8.4 percentage gap between in apprenticeship achievements between the least deprived and most deprived wards. So access really is shaped by prior attainment, by social capital, and by place long before that young person ever applies for the role. So what actually works? Sorry, the main part of my presentation, really. So we've got three core principles here. Um, The first is around, we talked about this already, early, targeted, and sustained support. So we know that the evidence shows that support is most effective when it starts early, when it's targeted at those who are facing the biggest barriers, and when it continues through those key transition points. So that's things like identifying the young people at risk of NEET early. It's about addressing those barriers, and it's about keeping that in place throughout the whole journey. So those key transition points, making sure that they have that support throughout the journey. It's also things around making sure we're talking about beyond one-off intentions. We want to create really clear pathways into work. So pre-apprenticeships and transition programs, quality careers education, and exposure to employers, which we talked about quite a lot today as well already. Wraparound support. So we know that young people furthest from the labour market will face a whole range of barriers, and many of those aren't actually necessarily about the workplace, but might be about their mental health. It might be about their caring responsibilities, housing instability. So there are lots of barriers that affect young people outside of the workplace, and we really do need to be addressing those as a whole. It's not also just about getting that apprentice, like providing that support to get the young person into the apprentice, but absolutely continuing it for at least the first year. Evidence shows that we really do need to make sure that we don't stop that support once the young person is in the workplace, so that we can keep them in there onto completion. And then thirdly, employer practices that enable success. So often we do focus an awful lot on how we can prepare the young person to succeed. But of course, many barriers are actually within the recruitment and workplace design itself. There's a huge over-reliance on qualifications. We talk a lot about the need for experience, but aren't providing opportunities for experience. So we need to be testing for skills and aptitude and attitude and potential, not just skills and qualifications. We need to think smarter about how we recruit. We know that 79% of young people don't go down traditional recruitment channels when looking for work. So why are we continuing to just use that channel? Lots of informal expectations, around confidence. Um, I had a really good conversation with somebody who was talking about when they started work. They had never been in a meeting with adults where they weren't being assessed. It had only been when they were kind of delivering as part of an A level. And she's like, I didn't really know what to say because I didn't want anyone to judge me. And these are really small little behaviours that, if we can think about how we can provide that support, will really make the difference for apprentices. And I will very quickly finish because I know that we're running out of time. Youth Futures flagship program, What Works for Recruitment and Retention, is carrying out randomized control trials with employers in real time to test very specific interventions that we believe will make a difference. Structured interview questions, providing interview questions in advance, assessment centres which we suspect aren't that effective, particularly for marginalised young people. How do you encourage people to give diversity data? There's a whole range of interventions that we'll be testing, and we will be starting to have results be live from the autumn. So please do watch this space to find out what really will make the difference in your business. In the meantime, however, we do have a campaign called Make It an Apprenticeship, which we developed with Amazing Apprenticeships and Workwhile, and it's designed to support businesses of all shapes and sizes, including SMEs, to design entry-level vacancies and turn them into apprenticeships to really support young people through work. Because actually, what really works to support young marginalised people into work and to thrive in work are apprenticeships. So learn from your peers who are doing it well, be inspired, and let's make it an apprenticeship. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Kate. And again, there was so much in that, but just a few things that really stuck out to me, which are starting to appear as themes. So your point about early intervention, I think, is really key. And those risk of meet indicators, Ronnie, for another lovely acronym, get a bingo card out. But that is really important. You know, it's not about putting a burden on those individual young people, but as a system, we have limited resources. So let's use the best data to try and work out who's going to need the most support. I think that makes a lot of sense. You brought in the regional dimension, which of course is top of the news at the moment, given what's happening. But that's absolutely right. Like, things are different between different regions, and trying to have a one size fits all approach hasn't worked in the past. And so I think we should definitely kind of think about that as well. And I think the other one I just wanted to bring out, and you didn't use these words, but the kind of trusted adult seems to be almost the kind of key ingredient that fits with every neat re-engagement program that works. And that trusted adult could be a youth worker or a teacher or a parent, but it could be your first boss, or it could be your work mentor. And as you say, that kind of that support, that mentoring to cross the boundary of not being into work, and somebody to ask those silly questions that really aren't silly questions of how do you deal with your first meeting can really make the difference, can't it?
Yeah.
And in a negative sense, if you don't have that, that can be the point where the wheels come off and you don't come into work, or the apprenticeship kind of fails. So
Yeah, absolutely.
really important themes. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Anna, you've already got 2 name checks, so you're doing well already.
I
Do you want to
know.
introduce yourself for anyone who doesn't know you?
Yes, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Anna Morrison. I'm the founder and director of Amazing Apprenticeships. So we have 3 main strands of work. So one is that we work with about 5,000 schools and colleges across the country to inspire teachers and careers professionals and young people and their families about apprenticeships and technical education. So my team are brilliant at coming up with really colourful, inventive, engaging resources that are designed to try and inspire young people to consider their options. We then work with employers of all sizes. So we do a lot of work with large levy paying employers, but we also do a huge amount of work with small businesses. We're a small business. There are 10 of us in the Amazing Apprenticeships team, and it's a real passion of mine that we get it right for small businesses in this space, hence the Small Business Summer campaign that we've been running with Edge Foundation. So this was really where we were thinking, do you know, it's really frustrating that smaller businesses keep telling us that young people perhaps aren't applying for their opportunities. Yet another conversation I might have later in the week, I'll speak to a large employer who has thousands of applications. And we're kind of saying, can we do something about this? What could we do? So decided that perhaps this summer it might be about trying to get young people out and about to see the small businesses in their local area and to start to be inspired by what's around them. We're based on an industrial estate in Hitchin. It's really grotty. It doesn't look inspirational. It doesn't look like a high rise in a city. You know, it's kind of, there's lots of kind of brown and grey buildings with names of companies that you would have no idea what they do. But on our road, we've got a puppet making company who have got the front window in Hamleys at the moment. We've got a coffee roaster that supplies Fortnum and Masons. We've got leading construction firms like Wilmot Dixon who have got their headquarters there. We've got a paddle zone, which is the fastest growing kind of leisure activity, along with Reformer Pilates. We've got one of those as well. So basically, we were kind of thinking, do you know, we've got all these exciting businesses. So how could we work with careers professionals to say, get your young people out and about this summer to explore their town centres, explore their industrial estates, and start to discover those opportunities? Because what we don't want is young people looking for apprenticeships, but thinking, well, I've never heard of that company, or I don't know where that is, or they're a small business, so the progression opportunities might not be great. Actually, we've got small businesses who do want to offer opportunities. But on the other side of it, of course, we've got small businesses that are struggling to navigate the apprenticeship landscape. And perhaps an apprenticeship isn't going to be the right first step for them. It might be that they start with work experience and they can engage in Equalex and all of the stuff with the local schools. It could be that part of the DWP Youth Guarantee offer might be the best step for them. We didn't know any of this when we designed this last summer. Obviously, we didn't know what was coming. But it could also be an apprenticeship. So we've been throughout the last few months running a series of webinars and working with partner organisations like the Federation of Small Businesses and Small Business Britain and Enterprise Nation to really get to those small businesses in the hearts of communities to say, come along and let's just help you. I'm a small business, we get it, let's talk it through and try and understand where some of those barriers and challenges are. And then the third bit is all the policy work that we do. So kind of constantly nudging policymakers to say, I think we could do things a bit differently. Yeah, so that's us.
Beautifully put. Thank you very much, Anna. And I remember when looking at a model in Switzerland a few years ago where there was kind of careers opportunities or careers visits for young people, and they would deliberately take them to kind of a main supplier on the first day, big company that you would know the name of, and then the second day would always be in one of their supply chain organizations, which you would never have heard of, to exactly make that point. These hidden businesses are all over. They're doing fascinating stuff. They're contributing to big names, even if they're a bit out of the limelight themselves. So that's just such an important message, I think.
Definitely.
When we've come down the line, we're going to come back to this issue that Anna's raised of how do we dramatically increase the number of SMEs who are offering apprenticeships, and I want to get everyone's kind of takes on that. But thank you so much for that, Anna. Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, my name is Chris Main. I'm the managing director of a technology company called Teleplan Forsberg. So we're based in Heysham, near Lancaster. And then I have a few other different hats, and one of the other hats is I co-founded a technology cluster called the Electronics Innovation, the Electech Innovation Cluster, with a handful of other sort of businesses, and we run that around the Morecambe Bay area.
Brilliant. Thank you, Chris. So tell us from the front line what some of the barriers are. Obviously, you're already there, but it's been a journey for you, and you work with a lot of your kind of colleagues in the area. What are the kind of barriers that SMEs are facing to taking on apprentices?
Yeah, so our sort of barriers were the reason the cluster formed, the Electric cluster formed, was really off the back of problems that we were facing recruiting. We couldn't find talent that in locally that was fit to our needs. Um, we needed electronics technicians. We needed people with electronic skills. We needed graduates who actually came out of university, brilliant in theory, but as soon as they had a soldering iron in their hands, lacked the practical skills. So there was a lot of training around that. So after, as an SME, do lots of complaining about it, and then kind of got to the point that actually we need to do something about this, but we can't do this in isolation because of the size we are, and you have less of an impact. So we looked at share it, and I wasn't doing this in isolation. Other business leaders in the local area were, and we started talking and came together and said we should probably do something about this, and how do we do it? And the first thing we did was apply for a boot camp. A company called Milliamp is part of our group. Saw the opportunity, said, why don't we do our own boot camp? So we applied and we won funding, and it was around the time lockdown kicked in shortly after we won funding, and made everything really dramatic and difficult. But we focused on what can we do around electronics? What can we do to really boost those skills in the area? So we got together. Our content provider fell through, so our engineers all came together, wrote the content. The tactic was stay ahead of the learners. We had a couple of learners who were really fast, challenging, and but we stayed ahead of them, and it was very successful. 100 people went into the course, 64 passed, which I'm told was good for a free course. 43 of those went into jobs in electronics or got promoted within their companies. But around the time we were creating this as well, a handful of us got together and said, what could we do together? So myself and Kate Holden from Like and Natasha from System Loco started looking at this cluster model. Let's not tackle problems on our own, let's tackle it together. And the first thing we did was go into local colleges and say, currently we're getting apprentices who have to travel 1 hour to get the training they need. And at that age, I think that's a difficult challenge for them. And I know a couple of our apprentices were getting their parents to drop them off and bring them back. So that's 4 hours out of the day for parents. It's a tall ask. So we went to the colleges and said, we were just, at the same time we were doing this boot camp, it was showing a bit of success. So we had a bit of a good case study to say, look, this is an interest and we have sort of jobs. And what I love about colleges is how reactive they can be. So I think 3 months later, they created an electronics lab, and we went in, we supported them with equipment, we provided equipment with them. We got our engineers together, who really clever bunch, and provided master classes to help instill that into the curriculum and work with the colleges. And it's set about sort of a good way of working, and we kind of fast forward, we've kind of built on that. We then took that into schools to look at, okay, now how do we inspire people to look at this type of career path and bring it through? But yeah, it's why I'm a big advocate of clusters, collaboration, working together, and trying to tackle that in a roundabout way.
Thank you so much, Chris. Such an inspiring example. And I think just to pick up a couple of things, your point about hand skills is something we've heard an awful lot.
Yeah.
We did some work, and this is not a made up name, with the wonderful Professor Kneebone, who is genuinely the Professor of Surgery at Imperial College. Wonderful. One of those nominative determinism things. And he was saying, like, he has the pick of candidates from across the country. It's a prestigious organization. But even people with the best A levels, they come and they can't do the physical bit of sewing you up. And they have an in-house artist in residence who's a lace maker who teaches them that kind of hand skills. Because obviously, if you, God forbid, have to have an operation, you want to be neatly sewn up, and that's part of it. So from different industries, we're continuing to hear that, and it's probably not for today, but we think, like, up the line, things like design and technology that have fallen out of the curriculum need to come back on, because people are not getting that head, heart and hands kind of education, which they need kind of right up at the front. And I think that point about collaboration is so important. That can be hard for big businesses because they're competing with kind of other big names. But for smaller businesses, it's like, great, there's enough for everyone. Like, let's collaborate. And I think that's such a powerful part of your story, and part of the kind of the best examples that we hear about this, where people are just kind of getting together to say, actually, as a group of companies in Norfolk, Morecambe Bay, in this sector, this is what we need. So let's kind of work together for that talent. I think it's really powerful. So, coming back to you, Anna, on this kind of key question then. So not every area has a Chris. So what can we do to, if we think like this is part of the answer to youth unemployment,
Yeah.
part of the stuff that we want to see in the Milburn Review is more SMEs offering more apprenticeships to these young people. How can we like get a dramatic increase in the number of SMEs who are kind of ready to roll from that side?
Yes, I think it's going to be a number of approaches that we're going to need actually. So I do think we need something nationally. Kind of government have the advantage, don't they, of being able to have big budgets and big reach. They have Companies House. They know every single company that is registered. Yet we all seem to have to repeat the same exercise of trying to gather email addresses to be able to get that message out to business owners. So if we think there are hundreds of thousands of new businesses that are registered each year, the number of SMEs potentially, and maybe not straight away, but kind of after a few years, might be ready to take on an apprentice. Kind of how are we working with them and nurturing them and taking a longer term view? I think the place based approach is crucial, and part of that is around inspiring local businesses to other inspirational stories and messages so that you can meet a business at a business breakfast or something like that and say, "Oh, how's it going for you?" We had a business breakfast last Friday and it was great. Our local security team, Arena Security, came along and they brought their apprentice with them. So he was talking to some of the businesses, fantastic networking and great skills development for him. But also the other businesses were like, "Oh, there's a real apprentice, right? So how does it work? Tell me more." So that kind of inspiration, I think, is needed. We've talked about the trusted adult and personalised approach for young people. I think exactly the same is the same for small businesses. So you could apply that same model. As a small business, you haven't got time to get it wrong. So you need to be able to get really good advice from a trusted source, but that's personalised to your organisation and your business and where you're at. Now, that might be from your accountant, it might be from your HR supplier that you outsource it to. It could be from a training provider, but whoever that is needs to understand what it's like to run a small business and to have to face some of the challenges that we do as small businesses. I do think we need to simplify it, and I wonder how far we can go with this. And is it about us getting better at hiring the wiring, or do we need to take some of the wiring out of it for small businesses, just so that there are no hidden bits to apprenticeships? But how could we genuinely simplify some of this around paperwork, off the job recorded hours, you know, minimum durations, age restrictions on standards. When I'm working with employers and trying to get them to understand apprenticeships, you're throwing all this new language at them. Oh, you need to go to the Skills England website and then you look up a standard and then you need to find a training provider and that could be one of these. And they kind of go, okay, this is a big checklist of stuff I've got to do. Um, I think we can help employers to get the environment right. I think you're spot on, Kate. As a small business, any business, you don't want to bring someone into your organisation and it not work. And I think particularly when it's a small team, you take it very personally. You're almost bringing them into your family. We hear that a lot, don't we, with small businesses? It's more like a family. So you want that person to thrive and succeed. So kind of being able to flag up where some of those areas for getting it right, what works, and being able to model that and showcase it. I think we need to be clearer on the risks around apprenticeships, but also the flexibilities for businesses. There is an assumption built into our apprenticeship system that all apprentices must be employed full time from the beginning. That doesn't have to be the case. And other flexibilities that really could help to widen opportunities for young people, particularly those with caring commitments, health conditions, learning differences, who might not be able to start full time from the beginning. So, how are we kind of saying to businesses, it's all right, this doesn't have to be a 5 day a week thing. Actually, we could start with 2 days, 3 days. This is how we can build it up, and this is what it could look like. And then I think on the system, we really could do with cutting the red tape around things like incentives. When employers trust in government incentives. We had this right with Kickstart, the enhanced incentive. Someone had put our apprentice's national insurance number wrong into the digital account or something, so we couldn't get our £3,000. And I knew who to ask at DFE and who to badger and say, look, the system's not working. We never ended up getting that money. I'm a business who will try again, but if other businesses have had that kind of experience, will they come back to the table? So let's try and help that bit feel really easy as well. And I think those are just some of the ideas that I'm feeling we could probably do at the moment.
Such a great rundown. I know that's so helpful. I'm going to come to the other panelists with some reflections on that in just a moment, and then we're going to open it up a little bit. But just one thing that really stuck in my mind was your question about, brokerage is great, and we definitely want more of that because hand holding is important. It's always going to be important. But actually, how much could we simplify the system so that the brokerage isn't so needed? Because at the moment, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
You've got to have somebody to hold your hand. Could we make it so that, most of it is kind of relatively self-explanatory? I think that's a really good challenge for us. And let's come back down the line. Kate, what are your reflections on that kind of core question of how do we get more SMEs and young people to get going with this?
Well, I've obviously agree with everything Anna said. But also what you're saying around the collaboration point, I think is so important because some of the conversations we've had with employers since the kind of first tranche of changes were announced in February is this huge focus on pastoral care. And I think everybody is very sympathetic to this and wants to be able to support young people to thrive. But I think if you're a small business, the thought of taking on someone with a whole range of needs is quite daunting. And we've had conversations say, well, the jobs grant is all well and good, but what am I going to do with £3,000? How much of a difference is that going to make to support this young person? Whereas conversely, talking to a large employer who's a trailblazer, he said, well, no, £3,000 might not make a big difference, but if we've got 100 apprentices, that is actually a really big program we can build with that. So there is something to me around, well, can we do something similar for small businesses? Can they come together and go, well, look, we're going to build this fantastic program that really supports people with special educational needs? Or so that kind of collaboration, I think, is really, really important. I think also from the top down, so in the same scenario, really, that large employer has a huge supply chain of small businesses. So what can they be doing to support? Can they unlock some of those doors? Can they help explain some of the red tape? Can they make the pastoral support that they're offering to their apprentices available to their supply chain? Because ultimately they need to have highly skilled people working for the people working for them. So I do think that collaboration point is key. And whilst of course we want government to facilitate that as much as possible, it's not always the quickest moving. So maybe it's something for employers to do to really grasp themselves and look how we can deliver more of that pastoral support for the young person, but also for the SME together.
Yeah, I love that point, and it's a real theme through everything that everyone said. Is this? This is basically a human level problem. Yes, there are things that could be done at national level, but it's the brokerage, it's the person on the phone, it's the person from the big company talking to the small company, it's the small companies working together. Like this is basically about relationships and people, and that's how it works. And you can't legislate for that, but you can make it easier. You can kind of get the conditions right. And Laura, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think on that, making it easier, I think absolutely. So we have something called the employer standards, which is sort of benchmarks for employers. We have about 1,800 employers, about 40% of which are SMEs who have actually completed this self-assessment. At the end of that, we ask them a set of questions, and it's really clear. You won't be surprised to hear at all that SMEs say, they experience worse cost constraints than other types of business. They have poorer access into education and schools, and they don't see the outcome. So if you think about those three things, we really have to demonstrate the benefits and make it easy for them. Just in terms of our focus at CEC at the moment, we're very focused on work experience. And Anna, you mentioned Equalex. So Equalex is a flexible model. So depending on the scale of the employer or how much they've got to offer or where they want to get involved in a young person's journey, it doesn't have to be a lot. But the difference is it's intentional. It's focused on those outcomes and it's part of a progression journey for the young person. So it's not just a sort of one-off that's going to go away into the ether. So combination, I would say, of that sort of make it easy, structured approach. I think Equalex is a good example. We're piloting it. It's in its second year. It's showing great promise. But I think the other thing to say is on the coordination side, we do have an established infrastructure of careers hubs, and they are there. So I think as a first port of call, I would always encourage someone to just contact your careers hub because they're going to have loads of build to obey type initiatives out there. We won't know the half of it, but there is a whole infrastructure there that can be tapped into.
Love that. And that point about Equax brings in that really important point about pipeline that we talk about a lot. And again, that's a human level thing, isn't it? If you do your work experience with a company, you get to know that person, you come back in the summer, you do a T-level placement. At a human level, that's how those opportunities are unlocked because
Positive
people have
cycle.
got to know each other and people will always go the extra mile for somebody they know, which is amazing. Chris, does all that ring true for you in terms of kind of what might help more people do what you're doing in your cluster?
Yeah, so again, coming back to that sort of collaboration model, one of the biggest benefits and what we recognize is businesses are at completely different stages. There are some very, very head down. There's lots going on and don't have time to look up. There are others that become a bit more embedded into the system, and they can signpost as well and offer that sort of peer support. So we've got 40 members now across our cluster, and the range of interaction is quite vast between. But it's that longer term view of we're making good progress. We're driving. So just to give you some numbers, by the way, from 2021, going from 0 kids with electronics through college or boot camps, I think the number's now 620 in the last 5 years. So the stress for me, by the way, is I've got to get as growth. I've got to try and generate as many jobs as possible, which ties into I think something you're coming on later. But it's tackling that. It's opportunistic with I think with SMEs. It's finding the right moment to engage. And there's a really good report from Gatsby around breaking the firewall around this piece, and they identify this. But it's picking out and that again, that cluster model, the brokerage being that generating awareness so that you can attack these things at the right time at the right place, because you never know when that company does suddenly scale up and grow really quickly. That's the time to tackle. Or it could be a leadership change. It could be something else. But then also understanding the value. Yeah, okay, we work in those boot camps. You got this college, the people coming out of college. So just to kind of put that into a money value number, just monetary value. We were using recruitment agents. We were trying to find people. We were going through all this sort of cost process to try and sign somebody, and then bringing somebody in, and then going through sort of 6 months of training and all the costs associated with that. And sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. Off the back of that, we put out an advert for a technician recently, and 2 years ago we put out an advert. We had 12 that applied for a job. Before it was a handful. We managed to shortlist that down. Sorry, we shortlisted down to 12. 8 had been on a program that we'd been engaged with, which is really good. And we've just put out another one recently. Now we're down to 16, and 14 had been on so the and apologies to any recruitment agents, but eventually we're avoiding that fee, and we're getting people that can hit the ground quicker within the business. So there is a direct monetary value that comes back through dividends in this process.
Yeah, I love that. Such an important bottom line point. We're going to come out to the audience and get a few points. I know people are here because you're experts. So if you want to just make a point, that's absolutely fine. You don't have to make it into a question. I'll give you that as a freebie, as long as you keep it nice and short. So we'll take 2 or 3 reflections, and then we'll come back to the panel again. Just here. Nice to see you, Ben. Mike is on its way, just so that everyone can hear.
Thanks. Kay, I was struck by your point about how you kind of achieve scale. And you were talking about, when you've got, if someone's employing 300 apprentices and they're each getting £3,000 or 100 apprentices, you can create an amazing wraparound program. I think we should look at incentives, diverting money towards providers. If we're trying to get money in SMEs to deliver more, open up more apprenticeship opportunities, their trusted adult is often a training provider. And they trust, brokerages are really good at getting them to the start line. But if they want someone who's going to be with them from recruitment all the way through to endpoint assessment, i.e. someone by their side, the training provider, whether it's a college or an independent training provider, can be that person. But they face genuine costs in getting out to to Morecambe or wherever, and plus the pastoral skills. So I would be very interested to know your views on whether actually some of the money that's been set aside at the moment for employer incentives could instead be repurposed to be provider incentives, or actually probably for a lower unit cost, aggregated up, you get a much bigger shift of the dial.
Brilliant. Thanks, Ben. Let's grab one more here, and then we'll come back on both of those.
Hi, thanks. I'm Simeon Perry. I'm chair of BSAS, the Built Environment Shared Apprenticeship Service. Just for information, shared apprenticeships are registered DWP flexi job, and BSAS is the non-profit construction-related ones. Sort of really lots of useful information. I suppose my response to some of what I said is shared apprenticeships are a solution to a lot of the issues that you flagged. The key challenges are getting SME employers in particular. It's a niche service within the apprenticeship service, if you like. We need greater promotion. That's greater knowledge of the services, public sector commissioners of all shapes, sizes, services have a huge part to play. Large construction companies, tier ones, have a huge part to play. That was mentioned. And sort of a number of other areas. I wrote some quick notes. But, the key question is, how can shared apprenticeships, if you like, in your view, Anna and et al., play a larger part because they are a strong solution?
Great. Thank you so much. Those two questions fit together really nicely. So what are the role of providers and flexi job apprenticeship agencies in this kind of in this area to kind of make things tie together? We come to you, Kate, and then Anna, and then everyone's welcome to have a go.
Let's think of the training provider point first. I mean, I haven't necessarily got a view around diverting funding, but I absolutely agree that training providers are should be a fantastic source of support for SMEs, and it's really hard. And actually, we've been working really closely with Anna, but also with Workwhile, and they have specifically been piloting a project that looks at how can we better support training providers to support SMEs, because actually it is a whole different kettle of fish. The rewards are very different, the challenges are very different. And SMEs were telling Workwhile when they were doing a survey kind of a year or so ago that actually we're struggling to find training providers that even want to work with us. So absolutely, more needs to be done there, and watch this space to see the findings from Workwhile. But yes, very alive to the fact that training providers are a fantastic resource and do need support, probably financial too. And then on the shared apprentices, yes, absolutely. As part of our Make It an Apprenticeship campaign, the third ask is talking around make more opportunities, which is slightly different, but kind of on the idea that if you are a large employer who is doing this well, can you look to overtrain for the benefit of your supply chain or your local sector? And there are some really good examples of businesses who are doing that already. Thames Water, which may be a slightly dirty word for, that's even quite an interesting play on words there as well, are doing that model. So they are overtraining, but they're also doing shared apprentices. So they are kind of, working with their supply chain to enable them to move between SMEs, because, it could be, it is a big ask actually for a very small SME to find 4 days work for an apprentice. But actually, if you can move that person around your supply chain, that just benefits everyone. So yes, agree on both of those points. They're fantastic things that some employers are already doing well, but there can definitely be more in that space.
Thanks, Kate. Anna, did you want to reflect on that as well?
Yeah, definitely. Providers are crucial. They are the third corner. They are one of the three corners, aren't they, of the apprenticeship triangle? And I think so often we don't see the funding bands or the funding reflecting the amount of energy that goes into supporting employers, particularly small employers. One thing that I keep nagging Skills England, DWP, whoever I can get to listen to, is why can't we relook at our funding model? So at the moment, we've got a system where 20% of the funding is weighted on achievement. And of course, that is really important. But what if we were to halve that and put some of that up front to support training providers with the additional costs? So whether that is supporting an SME, whether it is supporting a marginalised young person who's going to need extra help, perhaps from the training provider, to have a smooth start into their apprenticeship. That could be a care leaver, a learner with additional needs. Kind of, we haven't remodelled our apprenticeship funding for ages. So if everything's up for grabs at the moment, kind of, could we look at that? And on the same line, absolutely. I think where we had apprenticeship training agencies, however long ago, someone will give me, what was it, a decade ago that it might have come in with ATAs. And then there was the complicated register, and then it kind of came back with flexi job apprenticeships. I think there's such a crucial piece there. But almost when flexi job apprenticeships were reintroduced, it was quite narrow, wasn't it, in the different industries that could get involved. And I'd love to see that expanded. And also for us to do some more work as a sector to really flag where is it working and what do we need more of, and where are the bits of policy or red tape that are holding employers back from getting involved in this, and what could we do differently? Because I think this has got to be the way forward. If you look at workplaces, kind of so many hybrid models, things have changed, employment patterns have changed, and I think flexi job apprenticeships could fit really nicely into that.
Beautifully put. Chris, do you want to add to that? And then Laura?
Well, yeah, the shared apprenticeship is an interesting one because we have a very, very big defence neighbour and a very, very big nuclear neighbour, and it's something we've been pushing because it would be fantastic for them and for us if you can create that model where you have somebody crossing and bridging the two businesses, not only on a skills basis, but that apprentice might actually find that, I'd rather work for an SME than a big corporate, and vice versa. So the challenge is we work at pace and they don't quite work at pace because of various mechanisms that are obvious that they have to work through. So a push to make that happen would be very welcomed.
Very good point. Laura, did you want to reflect on that one?
Just anything that widens access and supports young people, completely agree.
Perfect. Taking my chair hat off, I think those are both really, really important points as well. I think, Ben, how passionately I feel how important providers are. I think my take on that is anything that that government could do to shift genuinely from a bit more competition towards a bit more collaboration and support could be really powerful. They've said that they will, but we don't really know what that might look like. And I think for me, the FJAA is the latest acronym, or ATAs, as you were saying, Anna, basically the same thing. That model has so much more to give that we haven't got out of it yet. Because I think for a lot of SMEs, it can really reduce the risk for them, but it can also lead to a much richer approach, richer program for the apprentices, as you were saying, Chris. So it's like a win-win if we can get that right. As we come to the end of our time together, I wanted to give everyone on the panel just one more chance to kind of leave us with something that you think would be really powerful in this area. So we've talked a lot about what might work here for the SMEs, for the young people as well. And what would be the kind of one thing that you'd like to perhaps say to the Millburn Review, since I've got a workshop with them on Monday, you take it away with me, which we could change to try and really make this a little bit easier and turn some of these kind of good examples that we've been hearing into much more of just the norm rather than the exception. Laura, sorry, I'm going to come to you first. What would you put on our list?
Yeah, so I think from our point of view, it's not really our role to talk about sort of policy or funding as such. However, anything to scale employer engagement. We're doing our bit on codifying high quality work experience, which could be in things like public procurement. But today's announcement, I think, about risk of need indicators in the education sector is just super helpful. There's a practical guide. The infrastructure's there. Use it.
Nice. Good. Kate?
I was going to say about training providers. Let's put that now. Probably pre-apprenticeship programs need to be refined and addressed. I think they've tried to with foundation apprenticeships and they haven't got it quite right. So certainly more work there so that young people can really hit the ground running when they start an apprenticeship.
Nice. Thank you so much. Anna, what would be from your long list?
I've got a very long list, as you can imagine. I think for me, one of the critical points at the moment is DWP are being mobilised to take lots of action to work with young people and to work with employers, which is great. But we need to make sure that they are equipped with enough good information to be able to have those conversations. So I would love to see a kind of a really rapid, kind of accelerated scale up CPD program for advisors who are doing that work on the ground, because then I think we might see even bigger impact from their work.
Nice, really, really clear example. And Chris, what would yours be?
So along the lines of the incentivization, I mean, we're a business that our overheads are climbing. You get additional national insurance on top of that. Some incentives to recruit targeted people that maybe offset that national insurance increase, so they can absorb that into the recruitment of a person would be really good. I do think keeping that focus on boot camps. I think boot camps allow a very, very focused skill. So um, for a company like ours, we could take somebody on who maybe hasn't got all the qualifications yet, but has a particular knack for soldering, and then can come into the business. And then once they're in the business, then they can grow within. So I think targeted boot camps on specialized skills gives a great starter. And then something that we've had a massive success with is the Kickstarter. So I think it's the Youth Guarantee Program or something similar. But we've got a fantastic example where we used the Kickstarter program, brought somebody in, never even thought about working in the technology sector, then went on to an apprenticeship that we did through the colleges we just supported. Now, then has become a junior engineer, and now is looking to do a degree apprenticeship going forward. So, how do more of that? Make that easy so that we can invest more in young people so that they come through and have more of a long-term view.
Fantastic. Brilliant. Well, it's going to be exciting rest of the year. We've got apprenticeship summer, and then we've got potentially a Milburn and Burnham autumn, all kind of pointing in this direction of more support and more structural support for young people. So a huge thank you to my panel, and thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of the day.